What's going on, everyone? So, thank you so much for tuning in to yet another episode of Fantasy Haus Live. As per usual, we got the weekly review coming at you, updated power rankings, and a preview into the next week. It was another exciting week in the league with actually a decent amount of shifting around in the power rankings. So, without too much further ado, let's get right into the action. And as always, if you guys are a fan of the content, please feel free to hit the subscribe button. Additionally, you can feel free to leave a comment down below. That way I can, get some feedback, which I always love to hear. All right, let's get into it. The first thing, as always, that we're going to get into is the review. So this is how kind of things shook out for Week 10. In our first matchup of the week, in our game of the week, that is, our number one overall top dog team, Nugent, was upset by yours truly, Champ Cheese, and a score of 142 to 127. It was a massive upset, bet on a long, like 3 or 4 game losing streak, so this was a big week. In matchup number 2, we had our number 2 overall top dog, The-Cheetah Hill, getting the very narrow win over Ceedeez Nuts. In our third matchup of the week, we had Bob's Burgers getting the win over Team Bajayjays with a score of 104 to 95. In our fourth matchup, we had the Lame Tanks getting the win over the Deviants, who continue to kind of spiral a little bit here in a score of 91 to 65. And lastly, in our, last but not least, we have Team Breeki picking up the win against Destinoooooo, who had actually been doing very, very well. And actually, Destinoooooo had just made it into the top dogs, into our number 3 overall top dogs. So to see them get upset is pretty interesting here. Two major upsets this week. Team Breeki getting that win, 122 to 115. Now we can take a look at kind of how some of that stuff broke down. Like I said, there was a lot of shifting around, and there was actually quite a few upsets. So let's kind of dive into these individual matchups. First, starting with our game of the week. Without too much further ado, here we go. So, like I said, in our first overall matchup, we had Team Nugent actually falling and being upset by Champ Cheese, which is ironic considering the Champ was the underdog coming into this. But coming this, we had Tom Brady only throwing up 18 points in that win over Seattle. On the opposite side of things, kind of roughly the same scoreline here. Jimmy G throwing up 18 in the win over the Chargers. Christian McCaffrey, still newly acquired by the San Francisco 49ers, scoring just underneath his projected here with 17 points in the win over the Chargers. While on the opposite side, Dalvin Cook actually had himself a day in that very, very insane game of the year candidate. Dalvin Cook went off for 23 against Buffalo. While we move into the next matchup of the wide receivers, when we're talking about of the running backs, we have Tony Pollard, who continues to perform well in the absence of Ezekiel Elliott, dropping 21 in the loss to Green Bay. Saquon Barkley continuing to have the stellar season, getting 23 points in the win over Houston. In the first matchup of wide receivers, we had AJ Brown, who actually kind of put up a bit of a dud this week, as Philadelphia actually had their undefeated streak come to an end against the Jordan Byan, Taylor Heineke, and the Commanders. Across the way, Justin Jefferson had a career game, climbing the ladder way late in the period, just being captain clutch when the Vikings needed it the most, coming out with 35 big ones in that win against Buffalo. In the second matchup here, we had Rondell Moore throwing up 18 in that win over the Rams, while Josh Palmer only able to get 7 despite being pretty much one of the only wide receivers left on that Chargers roster. Only able to get 7 in the loss to San Francisco. In the matchup of the tight ends, we had Robert Tonyan continuing to have a real bummer of a season, not really gaining that trust yet with Rodgers. Then again, this was the Christian Watson wake-up game here, so he just went off. And Tonyan only able to get not even 2 points, 1.8 here. While Tyler Higbee Probably the only lone bright spot here on the Rams for this game, able to get 15 in the loss to Arizona, while Cooper Kupp actually just found himself landed on IR. So that's actually going to rise his stock a little bit for this week, or for the next few weeks while he's out, you know. Moving into the flex spot, we had CeeDee Lamb having a phenomenal game against Green Bay, going off for 38, despite losing, of course, while Devontae Smith being the only benefactor. Obviously, A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, just two phenomenal receivers that they have there in Philly. So good for Jalen Hurts having all those weapons. Really able to get Devontae Smith has had such an up and down season. This time able to actually be, like I said before, the main benefactor, getting 13 points despite losing to Washington. Moving into the defenses, we had the Cowboys, who had been on a roll, being one of the highest scoring defenses so far this season, only able to get 2 points as they were kind of thrashed a little bit in that second half by Green Bay. Then across the way, you had the Raiders putting up a dud. Just yet again another goose egg for the Raiders, putting up 0 points while they got in that loss to Indy. And then lastly, in the kickers, we had Graham Gano go off for 7 in the win over Houston, while Jason Myers went off for kind of the same, but 6 points in the loss to Tampa Bay. Our next matchup saw let me go back here. Saw The-Cheetah Hill, the newly renamed The-Cheetah Hill, actually get the win over Ceedeez Nuts. We're actually going to take a deeper look into how that actually came to be. We're going to see how that matchup between The-Cheetah Hill and Ceedeez Nuts actually broke down. Okay, so starting at the top, Derek Carr going off for about 20 points despite losing to Indy. On the opposite side, Tua Tagovailoa continuing to bounce back from that horrific concussion that he had earlier in the season, dropping 26 points in the win over Cleveland. In the first running back positions, we have Austin Eckler, being the muscle hamster that he is, going off for 13, being Mr. Consistent there for the Chargers, even though it was a losing effort to San Francisco. On the opposite side, James Conner throwing up 23 points in the win over the Rams, while Travis Etienne continuing his bounce back season from his ACL tear, dropping 10 points despite the loss to Kansas City. While on the opposite side of that, you have the rookie sensation for Houston, Dameon Pierce, continuing also to be relatively consistent here, dropping 12 points despite losing to the Giants. In the wide receiver 1 matchups, you have Tyreek Hill going off for 15 as the man continues to have a stellar season in Miami in the win over Cleveland, while Cooper Kupp, on the other hand, unfortunately did get injured in this contest, only able to get 2.9 points before going out with injury. So you certainly wish him well. Moving into the wide receiver 2 matchups, you had 2 more studs here in Amon-Ra St. Brown going off for 22 in the win over Chicago, the 1-point win, might I add, over Chicago, while DeAndre Hopkins continuing to solidify his role in that number 1 slot there in Arizona, with 19 points in that win over the Rams. Moving into that tight end spot, you got Dawson Knox dropping almost 10 points, just under 9.7 actually, in the loss to Minnesota, while Kyle Pitts, who once again, just be kind of like it's been the story all season, has kind of just faded away and was only able to get just under 5 points with 4.8 in the losing effort to Carolina. In the flex spot, you had Jalen pulling off the waddle with 10.6 in the win over Cleveland, while Mike Adams also with a relatively the same scoreline here with 10.4 in the win over Seattle. In the defenses, we saw the Giants able to muster up 8 points in the win over Houston, while Philadelphia, who everyone saw as a juggernaut going this, and there was no way that they could lose against the Commanders, and sure enough, they lost. But in that losing effort, able to get 7 points. And lastly, in the matchup of the kickers, we had Ryan Suckup only able to get 2 points in the win over Seattle, while Younghoe Koo able to get 3. So again, another similar stat line between these two players in the loss to Carolina. And that is kind of how that matchup broke down. Matchup 3 saw, if I can go back, saw Bob's Burgers picking up a very crucial win this week over the Bajayjays, who's been kind of streaking up and down this season, as has been kind of a lot of the middle of the pack people. But we're going to take a look at how that exactly happened. As always, starting with the top, we have Kirk Cousins, who continues to have a very good season, able to get 19 points in the very narrow win, very thrilling win over Buffalo, while Justin Herbert was able to get 14 points in the loss to San Francisco. So obviously that one's got to go to Kirk Cousins, but Herbert still, you know, being able to throw points consistently. And there's also a decent amount of injuries in that Chargers wide receiver core too, so he's had to deal with a lot of that. In the first running back spot, we have Derrick Henry, only able to get 8.7 points despite winning in Denver. While on the opposite side, Cordarrelle Patterson also only, while he's still kind of working his way back from injury, only able to get 3 points in the loss to Carolina. In the second matchup of the running backs, we have Alvin Kamara, who kind of started, who is coming back to earth a little bit here, with 7.5 points in the loss to Pittsburgh, while Jamal Williams, who has been serving in for DeAndre Swift as the Lions kind of continue to rework him back into the rotation. He's actually done very, very well. Again, being consistent, able to get 11 points, almost 12 actually, in the very narrow win over Chicago. In the battle of wide receiver ones, we have Michael Pittman Jr. able to get 12 points, so scoring just under his projected in the win over Las Vegas, while Scary Terry able to throw up 20 big ones in that upset victory over the undefeated Philadelphia Eagles, which means there are no more undefeated teams here in, well, not here, but in the NFL. In the second battle of the wide receivers, we have Allen Lazard going off for 7.5 points in the the winning effort over Dallas. Once again, that was a lot of the Christian Watson showing out party, like a lot of it. Hopefully our team can continue that wonderful momentum. I know it's awkward seeing and hearing me talk so much praise about the Packers while wearing a Seahawks jersey, but I assure you, it's this way, assure you, I am a Pack fan. Anyways, moving on to the opposite side of the wide receiver 2 matchup, we have Christian Kirk able to get 31 in despite losing to Kansas City. The man went off and is actually having a fantastic season being traded away from Arizona. In the battle of the tight ends, Gerald Everett going off for 4.3 after, so he's been kind of falling back to earth a little bit here after having a pretty good start to the season with the Chargers. TJ Hawkinson continuing to produce no matter what team he's on. Obviously now he's with Minnesota, which makes a world of a difference, seeing as they are a title contender right now. In the flex spot, Kenneth Walker being the rookie sensation possibly of the year, with 13 points despite losing to Tampa, while Chris Olave only able to get 7 points in the loss to Pittsburgh. In the battle of the defenses, we saw the Titans get 11 points in the win over Denver, while the Saints, who've been very streaky this year, only able to get 5 points. Lastly, the kickers, Cameron Dicker, able to get 12 points in the loss to San Francisco, while Justin Tucker, who was on bye, drops a goose egg, so you hate to see it. And in our fourth matchup, we saw Lame Tanks getting a big victory over the Chicago Deviants, who were once one of the top dogs and have kind of been falling from grace a little bit here. But let's take a look at how their matchup broke down. So, Josh Allen at the top, able to drop 22 points despite narrowly losing to Minnesota. Aaron Rodgers, on the other hand, continuing to have, this was his best game in a long time, able to get 21 points. Most of the time he's been pretty much almost under 10, had barely scored over 14, so this was actually a very good game for him. In the running back number ones, Jonathan Taylor finally had a showing out party under new head coach Jeff Saturday and new play caller too. So it was great to see him kind of start to return to form. Leonard Fournette able to get 10 points in that win over Seattle. Moving into the running back number 2 slot, we have DeAndre Swift, who only able to get 8 points. Like I said earlier when I was talking about Jamal Williams, that they're kind of slowly working him back into the rotation. They don't want to injure him, which makes sense. He's a very explosive back, a very good back to have there for Detroit. While in the running back 2 spot, we have Miles Sanders, only able to get 5 points in the loss to Washington. In the battle of wide receiver 1s, we have Amari Cooper dropping. This was actually a low mark for him in the season here, while he only got 6.2 points in the loss to Miami, while across the way, Robert Woods, who has also had a very down year. I think that you could say that about all of Tennessee. The Tennessee team as a whole, they're very much underproduced. I know King Henry started to come back a little bit, but the entire team has had a down year, despite the fact they're actually doing still getting some wins. Robert Woods had still kind of having a down year, only 3 points. Moving into wide receiver 2s, we have Tyler Lockett able to continuing to be consistent as he always is. Able to get 13 points despite losing to Tampa, while George Pickens able to get 14 points in a big week for him in the win over New Orleans. Then in the battle of the tight ends, we had George Kittle only able to get 3 points, while Hunter Henry is on bye, so obviously kind of threw up a bit of a goose egg there. In the flex spot, we saw DJ Moore drop in 6.9 points in the win over Atlanta. Well, Clyde Edwards-Helaire dropping another goose egg and has pretty much effectively been phased out of that Kansas City offense. He's been seeing snaps behind both Isaiah Pacheco and Jerick McKinnon. Jerick McKinnon has been coming in on more of pass downs, while Pacheco has been leading a lot of the early down stuff, which is very unfortunate to see out of the LSU product. In the battle of the defenses, we saw the Packers in that win over Dallas, only able to get 2 points, while the Rams, the defending Super Bowl champs, only able to get 4, so kind of a similar stat line, just a hair bit more out of the Rams. In the similar battle of kickers here, we have Matt Gay able to get 5 points in the win over Arizona, while Mason Crosby able to get 6, including the game winner over Dallas. Our final matchup, where Team Breeki was also able to pull off the upset against Destinoooooo, who is our 3rd overall top dog. And we are going to take a look at how that actually came to be, which is, pretty insane. So, you gotta love it you always love when upsets happen. So, starting off, Patrick Mahomes continuing to have an MVP-like season, dropping 34 points in that big win over Jacksonville, while Jalen Hurts having a huge year as well, able to get 23 points despite losing to the Commanders. In the battle of RB1s, Nick Chubb just continues to hammer on for Cleveland there with 15 points in that loss to Miami, while Cam Akers trying to, remain somewhat relevant, only able to get 2 points. He should probably get subbed out if you ask me, but moving into the battle of running back 2s, we have Josh Jacobs, who was able to drop 22 points in that loss to Indianapolis, while Aaron Jones continues to thrive this season, having a much better year, able to get 23 big ones in that win over Dallas. See what happens when Green Bay uses their run game? We win games. Anyways, I digress. Moving into the battle of wide receiver 1s, we have Juju Smith-Schuster, who took a scary hit in that game, only able to get 5 points before being knocked out with injury there. You wish him a speedy recovery as well. Stephon Diggs had played a huge part in that game despite losing, dropping 24 points in the loss to Minnesota. On the opposite side, Jerry Jeudy. I'm not sure if I think he got knocked out pretty early in this game. So he unfortunately threw up a goose egg there. Obviously that's going to hurt when your player gets hurt on like maybe the first or second drive of the game. On the opposite way, you have Devontae Adams able to get 27 points, almost 28 despite losing to Indy, he and him and Derek Carr were just connecting all day. In the battle of the tight ends, Travis Kelce continues to remain the, without a doubt, tight end number 1 of the entire league, getting 20 points in the win over Jacksonville, while Pat Freiermuth only able to get 7.6 in the win over New Orleans. Moving into the flex spot, we have DK Metcalf able to get 13 points, so he just barely underperformed as projected there in the loss to Tampa, while Allen Robinson able to get 8.4 in the loss to Arizona, and you know, he might have an increased role with Cooper Kupp going down. Moving into the defenses, Chargers able to get 2 points despite 2 points in that loss to San Fran, while Buffalo able to get 3 points in the loss to Minnesota, so pretty similar stat line there at your defenses. Then lastly, we have Harrison Butker only able to get 3 points in the win over Jacksonville, while Daniel Carlson also able to muster up about 2 in the loss to Indianapolis. This brings us to our next section, which is the updated power rankings. And without too much further ado, here they are. So, let me bring up a quick little image to see where they were compared to last week. So, starting at the top, we have the Cheetah Hill, sitting at a record now of 8-2 as they move up from that number 2 spot into the 1 spot. Now that we, unfortunately, that means that Team Nugent finally has their fall from grace, falling into that 2 spot. Destinoooooo remains at that 3 spot. Oh, I forgot to mention the record. Team Nugent now sit at a record of 7-3. Destinoooooo sitting at our number 3rd overall top dog, sitting at a record of 6-4. Moving into the middle of the pack, we have Ceedeez Nuts, who is staying right there at that 4 spot at 5-5. Moving up into, or at that 4 spot, my apologies. Moving up into the 5th spot is Champ Cheese with a record of 5-5. Moving up into 6th is Bob's Burgers, also with a record of 5-5. Continuing their descent, unfortunately, is the Chicago Deviants, who fall to a record of 5-5 after jumping out to a winning record very early. Dropping down to 8th is the Bajayjays, who fall to 4-6. And then there was actually no movement in our dumpster fire teams, with Lame Tanks, with both of our dumpster fire teams picking up wins. Lame Tanks actually improves their record to 3-7, while Team Breeki improves their record to 2-8. So the next thing we're going to dive into here is going to be the preview for the next week, which is actually going to be our Week 11 preview. Without too much further ado, as always, here it is. So, this is actually going to be yet another big week in our league. In our first matchup, and actually our game of the week, we have Team Nugent, our number 2 overall top dog, taking on Destinoooooo, our number 3 overall top dog, in our first matchup. In our second matchup, we have the 4th seeded Ceedeez Nuts taking on the 6th seeded Bob's Burgers, both with a record of 5-5. In our third matchup of the week, we have the Deviants with the 7th seeded Deviants taking on the 5th seeded Champ Cheese. Again, both those teams also have a record of 5-5. In our fourth matchup, we have our number 1 overall top dog in The-Cheetah Hill with a record of 8-2, taking on our first of 2 dumpster fires. This one being our 9th ranked Lame Tanks with a record of 3-7. And last, and probably certainly least, we have Bajayjays in 8th, taking on the dead last Team Breeki. Bajayjays has a record of 4-6, while Team Breeki has a record of 2-8. Now, like we always do, we're gonna kind of dive into a little bit more, or a little bit closer into how these matches, you know, are going to shape up. So the first one we're going to take a look at here is Team Nugent and Destinoooooo. And we shall switch that over, starting at the top. So we have Marcus Mariota in Atlanta taking on Chicago versus Patrick Mahomes and KC going against the Chargers. Got to roll with the MVP candidate on this one. Easy money for sure. Roll into RB1s. We have CMC, Christian McCaffrey, and San Fran going against Arizona versus Nick Chubb and Cleveland going against Buffalo. Looks like Nick Chubb and Cleveland draw a very tough draw this week. Like I said, Buffalo, they're a contender, so it's going to be a tough defense. So you got to roll with Christian McCaffrey. Rolling into our running back twos, we have Tony Pollard and Dallas taking on Minnesota versus Josh Jacobs, and the Raiders taking on Denver. This is actually going to be quite the matchup. I'm going to lean more towards Josh Jacobs on here because the Denver defense is just a hair worse. Minnesota's defense is actually pretty good, but I would also monitor Ezekiel Elliott's health, because if he's healthy, I would expect that maybe Zeke gets some touches. Tony Pollard has been pretty much out touching him. I know obviously Zeke has been out with injury, but that's definitely something to monitor. Moving into wide receiver ones, T. Higgins is going against Pitt, while this person also has Juju Smith-Schuster in, so they will have to sub them out because Juju, I can almost guarantee, is not going to clear concussion protocol. Moving into wide receiver twos, we have AJ Brown with a questionable injury designation, so that'll be something to keep in mind. But they are going against an Indy team, which actually Indy, despite their record, actually does rank among the fewest in points allowed to their to opposing wide receivers. So you could see this could be another game where you see Devontae Smith goes down, but if AJ Brown is 100% cleared, I would expect that AJ Brown and the Eagles bounce back big in this game. While on the opposite side, you have Jerry Jeudy. We don't know if Jerry Jeudy's gonna be good to go. I think it was believed to be a sprain. Don't quote me on that. I could be wrong. So if he's not able to suit up, then that's more snaps for Cortland Sutton. But even if this was just 100% cleared, I would still go with AJ Brown on this one. Moving into the tight ends, we have Robert Tonyan in Green Bay going against Tennessee versus Kelsey and the Chargers, and Chiefs taking on the Chargers. Despite the fact the kind of juicy matchup with Tennessee, you still got to roll Travis Kelsey here. He's the undisputed tight end #1 in the league. Moving into the flex matchup, we have CeeDee Lamb and Dallas taking on Minnesota, while DK Metcalf is in Seattle's on a bye, so that's got to go to CeeDee. They got to switch him out. Once again, we have the Cowboys and Dallas taking on Minnesota versus the Chargers taking on KC. I think the Cowboys will actually have more turnovers of Kirk Cousins than you'll see of the Chargers defense on Mahomes. I think Mahomes is just playing at too high a level, too many healthy weapons on that offense. I think you're just going to see. I think you're going to see more points from him. More points and takeaways coming from that Cowboys team. Then lastly, in our battle of the kickers, we have Nick Folk in New England taking on the Jets versus Harrison Butker and KC taking on the Chargers. Everyone knows that New England is obviously still has Bill Belichick. They're still going to be a formidable team with that defense. There's been reports that obviously they're going to try and make Zach Wilson pass through the air and try to be real stingy against the run. If that is the case, then there's a lot of time that those defenses stall, especially the way Robert Saleh's been calling games. If I remember correctly, he's been more defensive minded. And if he is able to stop that New England offense, you will see Nick Folk, who is he's better than your average Bear when it comes to kicking field goals, so you could actually see some more points. While Harrison Butker, I think you'll see him for extra points for sure, but if we're talking pure field goals, I'm going to go out on a limb and say you might see more out of Nick Folk this week. In our second matchup, it features oops, I did the review again. In our second matchup, it features Bob's Burgers and Ceedeez Nuts, which should be obviously another exciting matchup, as these are two teams that are fighting for playoff position. A lot of these teams are fighting for playoff position. We'll take a look at how this one is shaping up at the moment. Starting off with our quarterbacks, we have Justin Herbert and the Chargers taking on KC versus Taylor Heineke and Washington going against Houston. Ooh, this is actually a good matchup. Herbert, without a lot of his weapons there, and going against the contending Chiefs. Taylor Heineke, even though he's with the Commanders, they've been upsetting a lot of teams, and now they get a Houston team. I'm gonna go with Heineke in this one. Low-key, I also just picked him up on my work league as well. In the running back 1 spot, we have Cordell Patterson in Atlanta taking on Chicago versus Joe Mixon and Cincy taking on Pitt. Ooh, I think this will be a pretty good matchup for these running backs. However, I think Patterson's gonna have the better day here. He's continuing to be more part of that rotation as he works his way back from injury, and Chicago's defense is not that great. On the other hand, Joe Mixon, he is one of the consistent parts of that Cincinnati offense. However, they're having much of a down year, so you can't blame them for that. A lot of offensive line issues there, but I think Cordell Patterson will have the better day. Moving into our running backs 2, we have Jamal Williams in Detroit going against the Giants versus Dameon Pierce in Houston going against Washington. I'm gonna roll with Dameon Pierce on this one. The Washington defense is pretty mediocre. I could be completely wrong, and we could totally see that the defensive front of Washington just completely demolished the offensive line of Houston. But I know on the opposite side, Jamal Williams has been being consistent, especially with DeAndre Swift out. But they've also been starting to work in Justin Jackson, so that means there's a third running back now there in Detroit. So that can't be good for anyone. Well, I mean, anyone that's like, it seems like more of a running back by committee or situation. But nonetheless, Jamal Williams has been a primary beneficiary of that for the most part. So you'll probably see some more usage out of him, a lot of consistent usage until they fully decide to bring DeAndre Swift and unleash the beast. Moving into the wide receiver 1s, we have Terry McLaurin in Washington going against Houston versus DeAndre Hopkins in Arizona going against San Francisco. I am going to roll with Terry McLaurin this one. He's proving to be Taylor Heineke's favorite target, and they're going against a Houston defense that is not very good this season. Moving into wide receiver 2s, we have Christian Kirk in Jacksonville, who's on bye, versus Garrett Wilson in the Jets, who's going against a tough New England secondary. And this one's automatically got to go to Garrett Wilson because Christian Kirk is on bye. So moving straight into the tight ends, we have TJ Hawkinson in Minnesota going against Dallas versus Kyle Pitts in Atlanta going against Chicago. Got to go with TJ Hawkinson, obviously being acquired by Minnesota, going against Dallas. That should be a very good game. Kyle Pitts, it's really hard to judge. He's just been so hit or miss with Atlanta. I know that's not really entirely his fault, but with exactly where they drafted him, you'd expect that he would be like almost a focal point pretty much with like him and Drake London, but it's just not panning out. Not that that is on his fault. Moving into the flex spot, we have Chris Olave taking on the Rams versus Ramondre Stevenson in the New England going against the Jets. Purely, you got to go with Ramondre in this one. He's just been producing no matter the team. He's their #1 back, while Chris Olave currently being the #1 wide receiver. He is going to have to deal with the difficult Rams defense, who does have Jalen Ramsey on that, and an Aaron Donald, so that just is not a good recipe for producing a lot of numbers. In the battle of the defenses, you have the Saints taking on the Rams, while you have the Eagles taking on Indy. I got to roll with the Eagles on this one, in a bounce back game against Indy. I think that defense is going to be flying around. In the battle of the kickers, we have Justin Tucker in Baltimore taking on Carolina versus Younghoe Koo in Atlanta taking on Chicago. And without a doubt, got to roll with the GOAT of kickers here in Justin Tucker. Our third matchup of the week, where we have Chicago Deviants taking on Champ Cheese. that matchup actually looks something like this. Kyler Murray in Arizona taking on San Fran. Hopefully he can play. I've heard supposedly there's some probable designations, but we'll see. Taking on Aaron Rodgers, who had the bounce back game in the awakening against Dallas. Taking on Tennessee, who ranks in the middle of the pack. I'm going to have to roll Dodgers on this one. I'm actually going to be going to that game tomorrow. So it's going to be cold. It's going to be at Lambeau. They're going to be wearing the icy white jersey. So we shall see. Hopefully we're in for something spectacular. I would love to see an Aaron Rodgers thrashing of Tennessee, but we'll see. Anyways, moving into running back number ones, we have Dalvin Cook in Minnesota taking on Dallas versus Leonard Fournette, who's actually on bye. So gotta give this one straight to Dalvin. Running back twos, we have Saquon in the Giants taking on Detroit versus Miles Sanders and Philly taking on Indy. You gotta obviously roll with Saquon on this one. Just having too good of a season, and Detroit is just the Detroit defense is not that great. Just giving up a lot of yards to pretty much every team. Moving into the wide receiver ones, we have Justin Jefferson, who had a monster game against Buffalo. Currently has an questionable designation. Hopefully, he will be able to be good to go for that game against Dallas, as they will need it. Dallas is going to be a formidable opponent, one of the defenses they're going to need to be able to beat. On the opposite side of that, you have Robert Woods taking on GB. You got to roll with Justin Jefferson. He's just one of the best wide receivers in the league. In wide receiver twos, you have Gabriel Davis and Buffalo taking on Cleveland versus George Pickens and Pittsburgh taking on Cincinnati. Both of these wide receivers are actually pretty hit or miss. I think George Pickens just had like his best stat line this past week. He also had an amazing catch this last week, while Gabe Davis has also been hit or miss. But in this case, I think there's a better chance of Gabe Davis having the better day, despite going against because they're going against Cleveland, which is not been really panning out this season at all. I know they're probably banking on Deshaun Watson coming back and that team kind of balling out, but we'll see about that. That defense hasn't been really that great either. Moving into the tight ends, we have Dalton Schultz and Dallas taking on Minnesota versus Hunter Henry and New England taking on the Jets. I am not trying to pick on my own team here, but Dalton Schultz I like in this. He produces numbers when Dak Prescott is on the field. There's no doubt about it. Dak looks his way often. He's had his best stat lines with him on the field. And if you look on the other side here, you have Hunter Henry and New England, who's taking on an actual, like, the Jets used to be a joke, but they're not a joke anymore. That defense is actually good. Robert Saleh has those boys 100% buying in, and they are killing it right now. That is to say that they are going against Bill Belichick, one of the greatest play callers and head coaches of all time in the league. So that will be a good game. It's also a divisional game, so a nice little rivalry game. On the opposite side, you have the Rams taking on New Orleans. This could go either way, but I might say that the Rams are going to have the better day, just because they have more potential to go off against New Orleans. Despite the fact I know that the Jets are playing very good, going against Bill Belichick, I kind of think that there might be a bit of a showdown here. And in the battle of the kickers, Jason Myers is actually on bye, so this goes straight to Mason Crosby. Forgot to pick up a kicker. Fourth matchup of the week, which is the number 1 overall team in the Cheetah Hill, taking on the Lame Tanks, who are looking up to add another win to their column after pulling off the major upset last week. And we can take a look at how we think, well, not how we think, about how things are looking right now. So, starting at the top with our quarterbacks, we have Josh Allen in Buffalo taking on Cleveland versus Dak Prescott and Dallas taking on Minnesota. Without a doubt, got to go Josh Allen on this one. Cleveland is, like I said before, not that great of a defense this year. Moving into the running backs, number 2, we have Jonathan Taylor in Indy taking on Philly versus Austin Eckler and the Chargers taking on the Chiefs. Oof. I think Austin Eckler is going to have the better stat line here. I know Jonathan Taylor is one of the best backs in the league when he's healthy, And I know this will be Jeff Saturday's next game as head coach, but this is a Philly team that's probably going to be angry after losing to the Commanders. So I think it might be a little bit harder to stop Eckler this week, or it'll be harder to stop Philly this week. In the running back 2 spot, we have DeAndre Swift in Detroit taking on the Giants, while Michael Carter and the Jets take on New England. Like I said before, DeAndre Swift has been kind of still limited as they work him back into the rotation. Jamal Williams has been doing a majority of the work there. They also started to feature Justin Jackson, as I mentioned earlier. Michael Carter, on the other hand, since Breece Hall went down with injury, he is there kind of the first back, but James Robinson has also been working in the rotation. But if DeAndre Swift is 100% healthy and good to go, you got to give this one to DeAndre Swift here. In the battle of the first set of wide receivers, we have Amari Cooper in Cleveland taking on Buffalo versus Deebo Samuel in San Fran taking on Arizona. This one's got to go to Deebo here, taking on that Arizona defense. Again, another defense that's ranking in the middle of the pack. And San Fran's starting to click now. Their defense, their offense, while Arizona is not quite doing so well. And the Buffalo defense on the opposite side is just going to be quite stifling for Cleveland to try and overcome. In the next matchup of wide receivers, we have Tyler Boyd and Cincy going against Pittsburgh, while Amon-Ra St. Brown and Detroit go against the Giants. Amon-Ra is the number 1. I expect for him to actually, I think Amon-Ra will have the better stat line here too. Tyler Boyd, he's more, I think, of their slot wide receiver in Cincy, but that Pittsburgh defense can actually be pretty decent. So I expect that to be actually a bit closer game with Amon-Ra actually able to get a little bit more of a stat line. In the battle of the tight ends, we have George Kittle and San Fran taking on Arizona versus Dawson Knox and Buffalo taking on Cleveland. I'm going to roll George Kittle having the better stat line. He's starting to finally start to find some rhythm there in San Francisco and Arizona. As I've just been saying and kind of repeating here, that Arizona more middle of the pack. So George Kittle, I would expect to have a better stat line. In the flex position, we have DJ Moore in Carolina versus Baltimore, while we have Mecole Hardman, and KC going against the Chargers. With as many mouths to feed, I don't see Mecole having the better day than DJ Moore. I think Baker Mayfield is starting, so that might have some sort of impact, but I think DJ Moore is going to have a better day. In the battle of the defenses, we have the Packers going against Tennessee. There's the Bengals going against Pittsburgh. If the Packers continue to play well like they did against Dallas, I would expect Dallas to have the Packers to have just a slightly better stat line than the Bengals will. In the matchup of the kickers, we have Matt Gay and the Rams taking on New Orleans versus Cairo Santos in Chicago taking on Atlanta. I think actually you might see Cairo Santos kick more field goals in that game against Atlanta. He's been kind of consistent for him, which is, something Chicagoans have been looking for since the double doink. But I think Cairo Santos might actually have the better stat line on that time. And in our final matchup, we have Bajayjays taking on Team Breeki. It's last, but certainly not least, and we will show you how this is so far lining up. As always, we start with our QBs. Kirk Cousins in Minnesota taking on Dallas versus Jalen Hurts and Philly taking on Indy. Ooh, gotta roll Jalen on this one. I think the Indy defense is a little bit worse, despite the fact they do give up a little less to the opposing wide receivers. That Dallas secondary did get gashed by Rodgers, but this is Rodgers we're talking about here, so we'll see if Kirk can produce. In the battle of the running backs, you have Derrick Henry going against Tennessee going against Green Bay versus Cam Akers, and the Rams going against New Orleans. This, without a doubt, goes to King Henry, as Cam Akers is almost phased out, feels like, out of that Rams offense. In running back 2, we have Alvin Kamara, New Orleans taking on the Rams versus Aaron Jones. In Green Bay taking on Tennessee, got to roll to Aaron Jones. He's been a stud this season. I expect them to, the Green Bay that is, to continue to rely on their run game, which means more Aaron Jones. In the battle of running or wide receiver number ones, we have Michael Pittman Jr. in Indy taking on Philly versus Stephon Diggs in Buffalo taking on Cleveland. I would roll my dice and say Stephon Diggs is going to have the better season or better stat line since they are going against Cleveland. In wide receiver twos, we have Allen Lazard and Green Bay going against Tennessee versus Davante Adams and the Chargers going against Denver. It is hard to go against Davante Adams, especially when he had coming off the stat line like he did last week. Allen Lazard, despite being technically the number one wide receiver there in Green Bay right at the moment, was clearly outproduced by Christian Watson, so I would expect Tay to continue to produce and have a better stat line this week. In the battle of the tight ends, we have Gerald Everett and the Chargers taking on KC versus Pat Freiermuth and Pitt taking on Cincinnati. This might actually be a pretty close match. I would probably expect this to be pretty even. But if I had to choose, maybe Gerald Everett, as they are very limited in the amount of wide receiver people that can catch balls there. In the flex spot, we have Kenneth Walker in Seattle, who's actually on bye, so this goes straight to Allen Robinson. And then lastly, in the battle of the defenses, we have the Titans taking on Green Bay versus the Bills taking on Cleveland. Without a doubt, you gotta go on the Bills here, taking on Cleveland for what feels like the zillionth time saying Cleveland's not that great defensively this year. And lastly, Daniel Carlson, because there is no kicker in the other spot. Alright, well, thank you everyone for hanging out and tuning in and just enjoying this. We covered the review of the week, we covered all of the craziness that happened in the power rankings, and we gave even a quick little dive into the preview with, as always, kind of our picks on which player is going to do better on each team's kind of like our head-to-head kind of like pick 'em sort of thing. If you guys enjoyed the content, please feel free to hit the follow button, the subscribe button. Also leave a comment. If you liked my picks or didn't like my picks, feel free to leave some sort of feedback. I always like to hear it. You guys are amazing. Much love as always. Peace out and stay safe.